You're listening to episode 85 of Literacy in Color. Today, we're diving into an essential tool used in early literacy instruction, decodable books. But we're not just talking about why decodables matter and how to use them effectively. We're also exploring something many educators are wondering about. How do we bridge students from decodable texts into authentic reading? In this episode, I'm joined by the wonderful Elise Lovejoy, founder of Express Readers and the Teacher's Table, who brings both classroom experience and a deep understanding of the research behind how children learn to read. In this conversation, we unpack how decodables should actually be used in our instruction, practical routines teachers can implement right away, and how to thoughtfully transition students towards more complex texts. So if you've ever wondered whether students can stay in decodables for too long or how to support that next step in their reading development, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am overjoyed to be joined with Elise Lovejoy of Express Readers today. She's a fabulous friend and colleague and mastermind behind all of the work that she does. And today we're going to be talking about decodable books, how we can use them, and even how to bridge that season of reading into more authentic text. So before we get started, I just want to give a warm welcome to Elise. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited.
Of course. Maybe you can give a brief introduction into who you are and what you do in this whole literacy world.
Thank you. Well, I am a teacher first. I've always been a teacher. I honestly do better with 5, 6, 7-year-olds than I do most other humans. But I started Express Readers when I was in the classroom. It was just a need, a gap to be filled. And it threw me into the business world. And once I got here, I realized that there were things that I wanted to do to help support the teachers as I had struggled. So I am the founder of Express Readers, but I'm also the founder of the Teacher's Table, which is an innovative new resource that is a platform for professional learning. And it includes incredible educators who I am so grateful provide their content, such as Michelle. And in order to help teachers, we all have a voice in this instead of listening to one voice or one person. So by cumulatively modeling and sharing our wisdom and then directly linking it to research, hopefully we can make moves where we haven't before.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so grateful to be part of the Teacher's Table. And at first, I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And then seeing the platform and seeing all of the content on it, it's just such an amazing resource. It's almost like a Pinterest for everything structured literacy that you're searching for. And it's something that schools can access with their firewalls, not something that would be blocked content, and just a great way to get bite-sized professional learning that's targeted in one arena. So I'm so impressed by you and all of the things that you do. And it's just amazing between that and Express Readers.
Oh, thank you so much. It's team effort on multiple parts of this. So I feel lucky to have the opportunity.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about decodable text, which is kind of the heart of how you got into this work in the first place. So maybe we can just start with some foundational knowledge and why do decodable texts even matter and why are they an essential part of our early literacy development?
Well, obviously, I'm passionate about this. And I will say that decodable books are one piece in multiple needed parts of our literacy curriculum. they're an essential piece, but they're just one piece, which is why I think it's so important to talk about how we use them. It would be really easy to use a decodable book like a leveled reader if you did not know how. And I've seen it done. So to understand that kids need to practice what they're learning, we can look at a multitude of different analogies, whether it's the one I always use where I say it's like teaching a child how to swim and then giving them a bike to practice. Or if we look at math, if I'm going to teach a child addition, I want to immediately give them addition problems, and I don't want to mix in things that they haven't learned yet. I want them to practice what it is that they're doing. It makes it so that practice becomes mastery, automaticity. It allows us to practice fluency without having to stop and start based on phonics structures that they don't know or words they haven't been introduced to with irregular parts or new morphemes. So decodable books are absolutely essential, but we just have to remember that it's one part. We can't hang our whole hat on it. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, I definitely believed this was it. This was the solution. And the reason I believe that, and I think it's valid to an extent, is that we watched the aha moment finally happen for kids. We were teaching phonics as a patch and giving leveled readers, and then realizing there wasn't a connection between the two. And so to watch kids read a decodable book for the first time, the second time, when they learn a new phonics structure, it's absolutely incredible to see them be able to use something and show that they know it. That application is just so very important. So there is a lot of research to say that decodable books need to be a part of this structure. Now, it also says that decodable text could be a part of it, meaning you could have passages, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I absolutely believe that that is a great way to practice those phonics structures. What I will say, though, is just like anything else, we want them to understand that books have words in them, just like our print awareness. They have words in them. Those words have sounds, and this is how we read it. So for us to not only apply our phonics to words, we are also applying it then to sentences and real books. So decodable books, for me, it attaches it to the joy of reading. When people say, oh, it's not joyful. Well, phonics in general is. And if it's not, then something else is going wrong because you can do so much fun stuff with it. But when a child can use the knowledge that they have and the skills that they've learned in something that makes them laugh, or that they get value out of, or that they can talk about, have a conversation with somebody, that's where we really see them connecting this skill base to actual fun with reading.
Well said. I love that. And I love the analogies that you painted early on too, because I think that makes it so concrete for educators to see how practical and essential it really is to this work. And I think there's so much value in having connected text in story. And like you said, that brings the joy aspect, because of course we can practice with sentences in isolation, but having students connect to characters in a book and see a story play through, I think that's part of the magic in that work as well. And when we think about equity and access, and particularly thinking about some of our students who haven't cracked the code yet, how do decodables support those kinds of notions?
Well, equity is absolutely at the core of a lot of our conversations around literacy. Kids have to have access to materials that match the skill set that they're on. And by normalizing that decodables are a part of instruction, they are a part of our practice, it allows for kids at all different skill sets to be able to practice what they're learning. So yes, we do whole class lessons, and it's so important that that instruction is done for everybody and everybody sees it. But sometimes practice boils down to where a child is. And so by meeting that need very specifically, very intentionally, understanding that this child on the assessments is showing a gap here, they are reading with these skill sets and we're working towards the mastery of these ones, we can use decodable books in a really intentional way to help support exactly what our kiddos need. And I think that if you have decodable books that are fun enough, that have enough to them, have meat, have a humor, whatever it is that makes your kids interested, you can make it a normal part of your classroom in a way that allows the kids that are still struggling and learning to see that this is just part of reading. Some books are more controlled and they have lots of the things that I have just learned, whereas some become a place I need to be flexible and I need to walk into with the knowledge that these might not all be the same as the exact rule or spelling rule or phonics rule that I have learned.
Yeah, yeah. And you alluded to this in the beginning when you were talking about how decodables are just one piece of the puzzle in a structured literacy classroom. And decodables can often be misunderstood in that way. So, from your perspective, what are decodables really meant for? And then what are they not meant for?
Well, there is teacher knowledge that needs to be behind a decodable. It is a learning resource. And just like any learning resource, we can use it wrong if we don't know how. So I think one of the things to really be cognizant of is that decodable books go along with a phonics scope and sequence. We need to be able to match what skills kids are practicing, are learning, are working towards mastery on. We also need to really understand that kids are going to have to be flexible. But just like when we talk about this I do, we do, you do process, the first time you do, there's a lot of support. So I kind of like to think that this I do is when I'm teaching, I'm showing how to do all of this reading. The we do is really your decodable books. And a little bit of that you do is decodable books as well. And then we need to start weaving in other kinds of texts, but with a very clear understanding so we don't have children think they're failing, that sometimes books are going to have phonics structures you haven't seen, words you haven't seen, and that is okay. Let's look at what we do know. And then we can talk about this having a flexible vowel sound. So maybe I've learned long A spelled with a sneaky E, but then it's also an AI. Or I've learned that AI says A, but in this word it says eh. So how am I going to help my kids so that they can be flexible? Just like anything, if we teach children a rule is a rule and we stand behind it, it's going to make them feel like they're failing or that they've been tricked when that rule changes. So decodable books are a great place to practice the skills that we're learning. I think that they absolutely should be used with a teacher and as practice with a partner or whisper reading. We don't want to necessarily say independent reading because that has been research-based to have a lot of room for error. So decodable books have this very important role in our classroom, but we need to start introducing and weaving in other books all along the way with that understanding that it's okay, we're not going to know all of this, and we need to start teaching kids that there are going to be other ways that you walk into a phonics structure and there's going to be some words that don't follow that rule that we have learned. And if we can do that, kids are going to be much more adept at taking risks, safe risks, and feeling comfortable doing that. And it's going to be easier to bridge out of decodables. So when we use decodables, it is often the very first thing we do. It can be used alongside other kinds of text to ensure that we're hearing those sounds. We want to make sure that they're using the phonics that they have learned immediately and to mastery. But also they can come back in when we see that a child is struggling with a specific skill. So I hesitate to say you use them and then you stop and you move on to something else. Sometimes we do need to backtrack a bit, but those decodables obviously should be higher or more advanced and have the skill set that the child needs. But like I think a good example is in second grade, maybe when you're learning silent letters. You might want to go back to a more basic structure so that they're only focusing on those silent letter pairings so that it's not overwhelming. Let's say you are doing math and you have taught addition. Now you're doing it in word problems. Well, hopefully you've already practiced it in isolation. You've used manipulatives. You've done a lot of work around that. And then it's in a word problem. If I go on to subtraction and division, the first time I do those, I don't necessarily want a ton of other skills around that practice. I want to ensure that they're using that new skill that I've taught them. They're using it well, capably, and they feel good because huge part of this is confidence. So, yeah, I do believe strongly in decodables, obviously, but I think it has to be stated that decodables are one piece and they need to be used intentionally.
Yeah. And I think these analogies are really painting a great picture because I've never thought of it that way. You were just talking about math as well. It's not as though we're going to do simple equations with addition, and then simple equations with subtraction, and then simple equations with multiplication, and then simple equations with division, and then move on to word problems for
Yeah.
addition.
Yeah.
You're focusing on a skill and going deeper in that skill. And I think the same goes when we're thinking across a phonics scope and sequence. It's not as though we're just moving our way up the phonics scope and sequence. We want to practice this skill, and then we're going to practice with a little more flexibility as well. So students can practice that set for variability. And there's going to be an art to toggling with how much of this text is controlled. And I remember reading in Wiley Blevin's book, there's no research on how decodable a text needs to be. Some people will say it needs to be 100% decodable, and some states have thresholds for 80% or 75% to allow for some of those tricky high frequency words. But really, the decodability is reliant on the text and the reader, and it's not a plug and play formula that's going to be the same for every child, too.
No. And we don't have a standard for decodability. So I really kind of balk when anybody says 100% decodable.
Yeah.
Think, well, for who and at what stage in their literacy journey? It's really difficult when we're talking about that. So teachers really have to be the champions and the directors of all of this. Who gets what and where does it go? Now, you need to have those resources on hand, but how they're used is going to come down to having a knowledgeable teacher who understands that this is a tool that's really going to help their kids.
Yeah, definitely. Every teacher's heard it. How do I help my kid read at home? Now, you've got something real to tell them. Reading.com is the only reading app that turns parents into reading teachers, not with games or gimmicks, but with a real phonics-based system that guides them lesson by lesson. It's not a game that keeps kids quiet in the back seat. It's a system that makes parents your partners, and it picks up right where your classroom leaves off. So tell your parents to check out reading.com. Visit reading.com/color for 60% off the annual plan today.
I do want to say one thing. When we're talking about those math problems, I think it is a really great way to look at how we need to practice things. And I think when you are doing word problems for the first time with addition or subtraction, you don't mix in those other topics because you really want to ensure that kids are finding it. However, look at that addition word problem. There are things in there that a child doesn't know. It's not necessarily a safe place. It's not just an equation. There are details or pieces that can be more difficult for a child. So we are always adding in these unknown factors for kids. And it's, how do we do that? Do we do it in a safe way where we say, I'm going to walk you through it this first time. I'm going to really help you find the information you need out of it. And I'm going to help you with the parts that you don't know. It's an environment around literacy that teachers have to balance so carefully between this decodable text, authentic text, and when do we use either one of them?
Yeah. And it's also this balance of knowing how heavily to scaffold for which moment. And I had a conversation with Jennifer Thronson. She just wrote a book, Raising Up Readers. And one of the things she talks about, she gives an analogy of like weightlifting. And say you want to do 20-pound dumbbells. You're not going to get to 20 pounds if you stick to 15s. You're going to have to go up a little bit, but maybe you have a coach helping boost your arm up a little bit, or maybe you only do one rep that time. But we're going to need a stretch every once in a while if we want to grow. And I think that's a good way to think about it as well.
That is a good analogy.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. And thinking about too, like the simple view of reading, I remember when the science of reading movement was first taking wind and this heavy emphasis on phonics instruction. And some people would say, oh, don't even worry about comprehension inside a decodable. It's just practicing the phonics skills. But we have to remember that language comprehension does not come later. We have to ensure that we're sitting on the shoulders of language, and reading sits on the language brain, and to make sure that we're not compartmentalizing everything, even though foundational skills need such intentional practice and application, that we're still building language all the way through too.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point about comprehension in a decodable book. And it's one reason to really find series that you like or multiple series you like, because comprehension should not also then be done later. We should use every opportunity to help a child grow into being a reader that understands how to comprehend a text. We're trying to give kids the way to comprehend because we can't teach specific comprehension. It's something that's happening inside your brain. It's a multitude of different parts that are coming together. So if we help kids in a decodable to comprehend it, it's like the very beginning steps of them walking into other books and being able to comprehend that as well. And so if you have decodables that you like or ones that have good stories, then you can ask questions about them. You can have activities that go along with them that require a child to show what they were hearing in there. Or maybe there is very early shades of inferencing. What were they thinking then? How did you know? What did their face look like? And yes, using the pictures is fine as well, because we're asking kids to look at everything in a book to understand the meaning after they've read the words.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because when you think about truly this orthographic mapping process that Linnea Airy points out, meaning's part of the puzzle. It's not just matching the letters to the sounds. We have to anchor it in meaning, and we have to teach kids from the beginning that reading is making meaning, even if it's not rich, but that we're doing that work from the very onset. So maybe we can get into some explicit routines that we can use inside decodables. I know that you're a teacher at heart. You have background as a reading interventionist as well. You still do that work.
Yeah.
What are some things that you can do inside a decodable at a small group table?
I think decodables lend themselves to such an easy structure. And my brain loves that, having this structure, this really quick grab. But I think a decodable lends themselves to that because you take whatever the phonics is in it that you're focusing on, you do a quick activity, a word building, word mapping, word chaining, work through what are the letters or the phonics or the letter pairings they're going to see in here. And you can make it fun because phonics doesn't have to be dry. And I always like to throw in a little writing work as well with that, just saying, writing those words, making sure that our kids are writing the graphemes. There can be a phonemic awareness warm-up in the sense that we're doing blending out loud, segmenting out loud, and we're using the words and the phonics structures that are in that book, and you've got all those words right there. You don't have to think of the list in your head for all of the short A or all of the L blend. They're all right there, so it makes it nice and easy. And then you ask questions along the way. There was a book, one of ours, and I was using it with an intervention group with second graders, and it said, it ended in a flash. And I stopped and I said, I mean, those words are so simple, right? If you take them separately. And I said, what does that mean? They said, one of the kids says, a bright light. You know, in normal circumstances, you're right. That's what a flash is. It's a bright light. But it was a really great moment to walk into that idiom or how there's shades of meaning in all these different words. So we walked, what is that? How could you use it in a sentence? Have you ever done something in a flash? What did you do and how fast did it take you? So taking pieces of these very simple books and turning them into a comprehension lesson, asking the simple questions. Who's the main character in this? Can you tell me what happened in the beginning, in the middle, in the end, and get that retell going on? And so I think that you can use it for the entire arc of what you need to do with it. And then add something at the end, add a writing. How would you, let's say, now this is kind of a funny story, but there was a decodable, and I'm not going to say which ones, but it was not a great one. And my son reads it and he gets to the end and the ending just fell flat. He looks at me and he goes, what was that? what happened? And I said, I don't know. I think we have to write the end of it. I'm trying to make it so that there's fun because he just read this whole book. And even though it was terrible, he's going to do something with it. So then he writes a couple of sentences that have those decodable words, maybe some of the irregular words that he had been learning. You can add in so many pieces and in such a short time. In this 10 to 15 minutes, if it's done quickly, these are often routines that teachers do all the time, and just surround it around that phonics structure that you're working on.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that extension for after reading as well. And writing decodables is no easy feat. For anyone thinks you just plop some simple words together, but there's an art of storytelling. And if you're just going to put some sentences, then just have kids read sentences. But if you're going to write a story, you have to make it a story. It has to have a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, it does. And I get into murky waters because I'm so appreciative that everybody is trying and all of that. But you really do need good stories in order to get our kids excited.
It's so true. It's so true. And so I know you've been particularly interested in this bridge away from decodables. How do we get kids into reading authentic text at the end of the day? Because that's truly the goal, to have less controlled text so they can read anything. They could pick up anything and be able to read it. So what's this transition process look like? And I know you talked a little bit about this already.
Mm-hmm. I think the transition requires a couple of really key pieces. And one is that we're constantly showing kids text that isn't always decodable. And we're showing them how to access that, how to go about it, but we're not requiring that they read it. And they know that. They know that it's okay that this isn't something you know. So let's say during science, you have a science text and you're doing an echo read or a choral read so that kids can at least follow along with you, and you're showing how it's supposed to be read, and they're having access to that text, and it might not be all things they can decode. I also think it's really important that we call that out. This has words in it that you're not going to know, or don't follow what we've been learning in class. And that's okay. I'm going to help with that. We're going to read it together, or I'm going to read it out loud and you repeat after me. And we're not requiring that they memorize it. We're just giving them access to it. So that's one. I think that there's a whole environment around how we introduce kids to text outside of those decodable books and the decodable text they're getting within their lessons. Then I think that we need to make sure that kids are seeing words that can be spelled one way and said multiple ways. Hear me out on that. So let's say I use an example, but maybe it wasn't a great one because it was irregular. But let's say it's the OW that's spelled O and OW. So I've got the word row, and it's in a sentence, and I say, I row the boat across the lake. And they can read everything in there, and it's great. And they get to it and they say, I row. I look at that one part and I point to it and I say, try another sound that spells. It's how do we help kids so they start seeing that there's this flexible element within the words we're reading, and they don't feel like they've made a mistake. They don't feel like they've done something wrong. Part of reading is trying out different sounds in words that you've been taught or introduced to, and then making sure it makes meaning for them. So if I row the boat across the lake, what other sound could this spell? And they say, oh, it spells oh too, row, oh, and then they get it. It's this explicit instruction of the fact that words have to be flexible sometimes. And it's also the modeling of the thinking. We talk about that a lot in a lot of other arenas, but we need to show how you would think about words, how you would think about the fluctuations between those spellings. So I think having this flexible view, making sure we're explicitly teaching that words can be that way, and showing the modeling behind the questioning of it and the finding meaning and how they can do that if they have a spot that they can't figure out or they've pronounced a word wrong. The final way, and there might be more aspects to this that could be explained, but just in the basic way, is in spelling. So that once kids are learning how to spell things, they understand the same concept, that sometimes it could be spelled in two different ways, and they start to see words as flexible and not always following this very specific rule. So it might be something like cake, and they spell CAIK. And I say, great, I see that you have a long A spelling in there. That's wonderful. In this word, it is a different spelling. Can you think of another long A spelling? And we start to show kids that they are not making a terrible mistake. They haven't gotten something quote unquote wrong, but there is a different way to do things. And sometimes we have to think through which one. I might even have them look at the word and say, does that look right? Have you seen it that way? And as long as I'm not making them feel like they're in trouble for it and I'm just pointing it out and I am their learning partner, I'm working with them, I think that those interactions are going to go a really long way to helping our kids move out of those decodable books or move sideways into authentic text more, because we do want kids to be doing decodables and authentic text at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm so glad that you're talking about this, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that you use decodables in K2 and then you could use authentic text maybe like second grade, third grade. And there's this huge jump where really you're using them both all of the time. It's just your level of support within each is going to look different. And it's different than this notion of using leveled readers in kindergarten where you're expecting kids to read texts that are beyond what they've been taught independently, because you're scaffolding the support. If students don't have access to these words, you're there to mediate the difficulty. You're not just expecting them to figure it out on their own. So I think this teacher scaffolding piece is so huge to the conversation, to know that it's just not throwing kids into the deep end and figure it out, but you're supporting them all along the way. And I love that example that you gave with row and row. And I was thinking like of all these words that are even real words like live and live. And maybe they read a sentence and they apply the wrong pronunciation. And then all of a sudden the context clicks in and it's like, oh, wait, I have to flex my sounds again. Yeah.
Very much so.
And it's so true, even with the spelling, it's like they learn these orthographic conventions and AI does say A, but we need to provide like enough practice for them to apply the correct representation in the right moment and for them to have enough opportunities for that all to stick. So those were all great suggestions.
Thank you.
So what happens if kids stay in decodables a little bit too long?
I think if kids stay in decodables too long, past the point where they need to, or they haven't been exposed to other kinds of text, I think they become too strict with the rules, and it becomes very difficult not only to spell when we ask for multiple spellings of a specific sound, but it becomes really difficult for them to move into those next books in advance. Like you were saying before, if you don't ever stretch into something else, and obviously I say stretch with the kids need to know your expectation of them. If I am stretching them, I'm going to let them know that. And I'm going to let them know that I'm there to support them. But we do want them to stretch a little bit and apply those phonics in a place that isn't so quote unquote safe or controlled. We want them to try it out. I'll give you another example. It's like teaching a child how to ride a bike on a stationary bike or a bike with training wheels. Occasionally, I need to take that off and I need to show them what it feels like, or they're going to get too used to the balance that happens with those training wheels. And then they're not going to be able to balance it themselves. So if we give them the bike without it, and I might stand next to them and I'm holding onto the seat, I'm allowing them the opportunity to see what it feels like, to see which parts they're really good at, what they can do on their own. And sometimes they might take off. And most of the time when that happens, we realize it's a child that was going to be a natural at this, or they were going to be good at it and they weren't going to need as much practice. And that's great. But then I'm not holding them back and keeping them on training wheels a whole lot longer than they need to be. I think we just don't want kids to be set in their ways and to not try, take safe risks or see if they can move beyond that. Because again, you won't ever know if they can move beyond it if you keep them in it.
Yeah. It's this false sense of security, because eventually the things that we read every day are not so controlled. So we need to have that bridge for them to get there eventually. And are there any signs or signals that teachers can look for to know, maybe they're ready for a little less controlled and a little more authentic?
Yeah, I think for sure. Obviously, if they are reading fluently in a decodable and they're reading, maybe not a decodable that introduces new phonics structures, but let's say at the step that they're comfortable with, they're reading really fluently and it doesn't seem to cause them any pause or not as much pause, you can most definitely try something outside those bounds and obviously look at it, make sure you identify what the kids can and cannot read in it yet, maybe expose them to some of those parts. I think you have to try all along the way because you don't know. It's like when we're talking about assessments. This is a constant informal assessment that teachers do as they watch kids read. We decide if they need more supports, less supports, if they can move on to the next section. We can't always rely on it just being this very formal assessment they have 3 times a year or whatever is mandated at that point. I think that when kids are reading fluently, or if they're approaching new words in other texts, or they're curious about them, or they're trying them out. I have one son that struggles at reading, and I have one that honestly tries to read everything. I would give my younger son, who's a fabulous reader, and it just came naturally to him, I would give him Decodables so that I could show him something new and have him read it and feel successful with it. But we absolutely try lots of other kinds of books. And if I get to something in a really difficult text, I'll say, oh, you can read this part, and I'll have him try it out. I think that it unfortunately is never going to be a math problem. It's always going to be science. There isn't a formula to say when a child needs to switch out of one thing. And there's not a formula for every single child. It's a science problem. We have to try things out. We have to test the waters. And our teachers are our scientists. And so, again, I come back to knowledge is power in this, because if a teacher knows how to look for kids' mastery or kids struggling, we're going to be much more successful approaching literacy instruction as the foundation that it is.
That's so well put. A lot of teachers might have this fear of not knowing, and it's just, we need more practice in it. Decodables can be new to some schools, some districts, some teachers, and even just toggling inside controlled text and figuring that out and what that looks like in instruction can be a new journey for some teachers. And it can be a learning curve to know how to balance something that's tightly controlled with something that's more linguistically rich. And some of that comes with time.
It does. And I mean, I have to say, I've even put kids in the wrong Decodables. I think they can do something more than they can. And then I say, whoops, my fault. Let's try this one. You know, it's a process trying to figure out what's going to be the best practice source for a child. You do get lucky sometimes, and 75% of your class is all kind of in a very easy category, you know. But I appreciate you saying that, because I think we have to leave a lot of practice for teachers in this as well. And grace.
Yeah. It doesn't make you a bad teacher. It actually makes you a better one. And even the best athletes need a coach, right?
Exactly. Good way to put it.
Yeah. In other exciting news, I know you're publishing a new book, Foundations for Life by Lynn Stone. Can you give us a little sneak peek or insight about that?
I haven't talked about it yet, but I'm really excited. Lynn Stone is a brilliant mind in the field of linguistics, and she's done so much work with practitioners and then started working with kids. She really likes to see the application of information, the academic information that she's providing and that she studies. She's not a researcher, but all of her areas of study. And so this is a little bit of a different kind of book than she's had before. It directly applies to working with kids. It gives the practice behind a lot of it. And I think it's going to be a really incredible resource for teachers, for parents that are homeschooling, for interventionists that are working one-on-one or in small groups with kids, because it identifies that not everything is this script of phonics to words to sentences to reading. Sometimes kids need an added element in this to understand and identify the etymology behind words and why they spell it a different way. I'll give an example: do and go. So do and go. And when I heard this, it actually blew my mind. I hadn't thought of this way. You know, we teach do as an irregular word. We teach go as an irregular word until we get to open vowels. And then obviously it is not irregular. It just has a phonic structure they haven't learned. But if you teach them together, you've got do and go. They don't make the same sound with the O. But then I've got done and gone. And I've got doing and going. And so the structures of how these are spelled are linked. Are closely linked, and does and goes it helps kids in a way that as a teacher myself, who was going through the very explicit steps of phonics to words, to sentences, to learning, it sheds a different layer on this. And I think it will be an incredible resource for teachers moving forward, because we always have kids that need, and I don't want to say just extra support, but sometimes need a different approach to help them understand spellings and why words are put together the way that they are.
I love that. You're speaking my love language.
I knew that. I
love it. I love it so much. And it's so true, because in the primary grades, there's such a heavy emphasis on phonics instruction. And I am the biggest proponent of phonics and learning sound symbol correspondences. But when you think about the English spelling system, it's more than sound. It's more than speech to print. You have morphology involved. You have history involved. And sometimes those trickier spellings can be explained through another lens rather than having to memorize those parts. And so I think this is going to be such a valuable resource to tap into words through another approach rather than just saying, oh, you just have to memorize this one. And I love that it's going to be teacher facing and applicable for teachers, because I have all her books on my shelf.
Me too. And unfortunately, this won't be the same size, because there's things that you can copy in it and use with kids. But I think it's going to be an amazing resource to help, especially deepen teacher understanding of what we originally thought was, well, now there's just some words that kids need to memorize a part in. It's kind of the way that we can move forward or deeper into that word study, but in a simplified way. Because as a teacher, going deep into etymology isn't always realistic, although I think it's incredible and I think people should know more about words. But how does that actually apply to my class? And I think that Lynn does a really beautiful job of making that applicable and realistic for teachers and people who are providing that support.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, the end goal of it all is to get students to be proficient readers and spellers. The end goal isn't to become, a linguist or a historian.
For sure. Well, thank you for asking about our book, though, because Foundations for Life will come out in March, and we're going to preview a couple of the copies at Plain Talk so that people can start to get a peek at it. I think it's just a really brilliant way to approach understanding and the use of words and instruction of those words in reading and in spelling.
Definitely. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Amazing. So this has been such a wonderful conversation. It's clear you're an expert in decodables and foundational skill work, and I love your books. I'm so happy that teachers and families have the opportunity to bring that into their instruction, because they're so valuable in getting students to lift words off the page and to become true readers. It's really special that Express Readers exists and the Teachers Table exists. I'm grateful for you and all the work you do. Maybe just one more time, you can share with listeners how they can connect with you and find out more about all the wonderful offerings you have.
Well, thank you. Express Readers can be found at www.expressreaders.org, and the Teachers Table is at theteacherstable.org. Both of them are, lots of information on it, and I'm always accessible. I love talking to anybody that has questions or that wants to discuss a topic, because I'm open to learn. So reach out to me on all the platforms.
Wonderful. So we'll link all of that in the show notes. Be sure to check it all out. And thanks again for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me and for being such an amazing steward of some of this content and access to researchers and practitioners. It's incredible.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.